If you all could please make sure that your mics are muted, we would greatly appreciate it. I am Jessica Jones, one of the K-5 literacy specialists here at Richland School District 2. And on behalf of myself and Angel, I would like to welcome you to part 2 of culturally responsive teaching in 2021. This afternoon, we have another guest for you, Dr. Chris Cass. I will introduce him in just a moment. But I do want to let you know that we will, just like last time in the chat, put a link to sign in. So make sure that you sign in to indicate that you are here to represent your school. Also, just like last time on that link, if you brought with you any concerns on behalf of your team, we ask that you indicate those on the form as well. So once again, welcome. And now I am going to introduce you our teacher for this afternoon. Please make sure that your mics are muted. Thank you. Dr. Chris Hass. Chris Hass is a second and third grade teacher at the Center for Inquiry in Richland School District 2. In his 20 years as an educator, he has taught in a variety of settings, served as an adjunct professor for early childhood and elementary programs, and presented at all levels on the importance of integrating social justice teaching into our everyday practices. He is a recently published author of, not sure if you all can see me in your screen, Social Justice Talk. And I'm sure that he will be sharing a few things from his book with us this afternoon. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Chris Hass. Please join me in welcoming him with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Jessica. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to join you all. Jessica, are you going to share the presentation or do you want me to from my end?
You can share it from your end.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that. Let me get it set up now. Okay, is it up? Awesome, thank you. So I had an opportunity to meet with Jessica and Angel and watch a video of your last session with Dr. Grant from the district office and look through all the feedback that you all had given in terms of your response to what you've been talking about before and kind of where you wanted to head next. So I'm excited to come in and join the conversation with you all this month and guide our discussion towards this idea of social justice teaching and what might that be in our classrooms, what might it look like, and what are some places that we can get started and some resources that we might have available to us to help us do that work. So those are all the things that I'm planning on sharing with you today. I wanted to start off, however, with just some small group discussions amongst yourselves. And we're going to put you
I can't hear.
Can you not hear me?
Oh, I had that back on since I came back in class.
Can you?
If you guys could, please make sure that you're muted. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Man, this isn't much different than my school day. All right. Okay. We're going to put you into breakout rooms. And what I would like you to start out by doing is just talk with a couple other teachers in the district. How would you define social justice teaching? When we say social justice teaching, what does that mean to you? What might that look like in a classroom? And we'll come back together in maybe 3 or 4 minutes and share some things out.
We're all back.
Yeah, good. So in my group, and can everyone please make sure that you are on mute so we don't get feedback and competing noises.
Add these stuff to your notebook.
So in my group, there was some discussion of maybe a little something to do with taking on multiple perspectives when we talk about history and things of that nature, but also not really knowing how to define social justice or not being too certain what this means in our classrooms. If you wouldn't mind, would you drop in the chat, what are some things that your group talked about? How were people defining social justice teaching? And Jessica will read a couple of those out to us. And just a reminder, if everyone could put themselves on mute, that would be a huge helper.
All right, so I'm seeing analyzing current events with a critical lens, allowing kids to think for themselves and share their opinions, making sure students are seeing, oh, it's going fast now, making sure students are seeing their reflection in books that they're being read to in class, making sure the students can see themselves in the stories, teaching students to challenge social, cultural, and economic inequalities, and teaching them how to do so respectfully.
Yeah, so I'm hearing people talk about addressing needs of our children and who they are as social beings in this world, but it's also addressing issues outside of our classroom, things that are going on in the world around us. So we ask the same question of our faculty. We're dedicating a couple of meetings a month to this topic for the whole of the second half of the year. And lots of the same responses, the idea of having a deep respect for individuals, families, and cultures, pressing issues around race and religion and gender and sexual orientation, and finding ways for those to find themselves in our classroom, to have discussions around those in our classroom, empowering our students, enhancing their cultural competency, noticing inequities that are around us in the world, and helping our kids to think through this. So when I think about social justice in my classroom,
Dr. Hass, you can't see the screen.
You can't what?
You can't see your screen.
You can't see my screen. Okay. How about now?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I guess when the breakout room must have messed it up. So when I think about social justice in my classroom, I put it around a framework of 4 components. The first is identity. The first component of social justice teaching in our classroom, and again, if you can make sure you're on mute, that would be wonderful. The first is social identity. In our classrooms, we should be helping our kids celebrate exactly who they are in this world. And that's not just their race, and it's not just their gender, right? It's their religion, it's their family structures, it's their socioeconomic status, it's their interests, all these sorts of things. So the first component is helping our kids to celebrate who they are. The second component is thinking about diversity, not just celebrating who we are, but acknowledging who other people are and the intersection of all those different groups that they belong to, and helping our kids to come to understand that we are stronger because of our diversity. So that is not the message that you get from many, many places, unfortunately. To help them understand that there's much diversity around us and there's great power, there's great potential, there's great value in that. The third aspect of social justice teaching, and one that I don't think happens nearly often up in classrooms, especially in elementary classrooms, is justice. We need to be helping our kids begin to think more critically about the things that happen in the world and talk about them together and try to make sense of them. In my classroom, that means my kids have opportunities to come in and talk about things they don't think are fair, things that they've heard in the news, things that they've experienced in restaurants, things that they've overheard, so that they can come in and talk about that. And I can give you an example of that. Once you give kids the space and you support them in asking these sorts of questions, you have kids who come in and ask questions such as, why do the boys laugh when a girl beats them? Or they come in and ask, why do I see so much black crime on TV, but I don't see white crime, because I know they're committing those crimes too, right? The kids notice these things. They see these things. We don't think they do. We say they're too young. I work with 7-year-olds. People say, no, 7-year-olds don't notice these things. Absolutely they do. I know that's true because I see evidence of it from the kids' questions and observations that they bring into our classroom. So helping them think around justice. What does it mean to be just? What does it mean to be fair? And what can we do to work towards that in our lives, in our classroom, and in our broader communities? And then the last aspect, which builds on what I just said, is activism. How do we help our kids take action on their convictions? I would argue that has to be an aspect of our teaching. If we're going to teach them to write persuasively, have them write persuasively for a purpose. Have them research something important and try to create some greater good with that. But having them learn to take action on their convictions. So also of importance is we can't just say we're teaching for social justice. We actually have to know what it is we're trying to accomplish with our kids so we can know if we're being successful. So naming explicit social justice goals for our teaching. So I have some in my classroom, and I group them within these frameworks that I just talked about. So when I think about identity and diversity, I want to construct a strong community in the classroom. I want the kids to appreciate the value of their individuality as well as the social groups to which they belong. And I want them to understand diversity takes many forms and it holds great value. And I explicitly work to do each of those things. I hope they don't happen by accident. I make sure that I'm planning in a way that allows them to build these things. In terms of justice, I want them to possess a critical curiosity about the world. I want them to ask questions about things that don't make sense to them. I want them to question why things happen when they don't think they're very fair, so that if nothing else, they can start to make sense of them, but they can also learn to make sense of them in a setting where not everyone agrees with them. Our kids, all of us, right, or mostly in these homogenous bubbles in our homes, in our inner communities, public school classrooms might be the only opportunity they have to be in a setting with people who have diverse opinions and diverse experiences, and they need to hear those. They don't always have to agree with them, but they certainly need to hear them, especially when someone's speaking as a primary resource because they've experienced it or their family has experienced it. I'm thinking that especially in terms of issues such as race, when you look across our profession nationally, 80% of our teachers are white teachers, lots of white female teachers. If we're going to talk about these topics, we really need to rely on our kids to share their experiences, their perspectives, so that the kids can start seeing beyond themselves and beyond their teachers. I want them to question social beliefs and practices on a regular basis. We don't do it just because we do it, but why do we do it? Why is it that way? I want them to be informed of current events, and I want them to identify acts of oppression and false beliefs. And with actions, I want them to know the value of multiple perspectives, to live alongside others in a democratic way. Not a dramatic way, we do that already. Man, we do that today. I want them to become critical consumers of information. Don't assume it's true because you read it, because you saw it. What sorts of questions should we be asking? What's missing? Whose voice is missing? And I want them to take action on their conviction. So today we are going to focus on the first two, which is identity and diversity in a very specific way. So if you don't already have a notebook or a piece of paper and a pencil, I need you to get one now, because I'm going to ask you to jot some things down for me. And we're going to go to breakout rooms at the end and discuss this with people. And I want you to have notes so that you can do that in a really thoughtful manner, so you can have a rich conversation with others. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a number of questions. We're going to focus on literature, and I'm going to bring this back around at the end and talk a little bit more about why and what that looks like in some other places. I'm going to ask you some questions about the literature in your classroom, and I want you to answer very, very honestly. I do this exact same work with myself each and every year, and I invite my kids to help me do this work as well. So my first question, what chapter book is your class reading as a whole group read aloud right now? If you'll jot that down. So for my class, we've been reading Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Grace. My second question, what are other chapter books you have read this year as a whole class read aloud? I'm going to give you a moment because that one might take a while. So we've read a number. This is a sampling of them. Next question. Which favorite chapter books do you try to read to each? I have loop because we use this as our faculty and we loop. But which favorite chapter books do you try to read to every class before your kids leave you? Not that maybe you do it every single year, but you certainly try every year because it's a really important book to you. Here's mine. Next question. What were the last couple picture books that you read aloud to your class that you shared with them? for math, some for science, some for reading, and just enjoy. Next question. What other picture books do you recall having read to your class this year? Probably a lot, right? Because we're elementary. There's a couple of my favorites from this year. Somebody just came off mute. There you go.
My second wish.
Okay. Oh, there's some others. Who was the last author that you featured as an author study in reading or writing workshop? I remember when the units of study first came out with Lucy Calkins, almost all of the author studies were around Patricia McLaughlin, Cynthia Rylant. Who are some of the authors that you use, or the last one that you used for author study? Ours was Jerry Plata, because we were looking specifically at science and informational text ABC books. Next question, what are some other authors that you have featured this year as an author study in reading or writing workshop? Which other author text sets have you brought in to support your curriculum? So another that we focused on this year was Jacqueline Woodson. Okay. Name your 3 favorite authors of children's literature. I have lots of current ones. I went to old ones that dominated much of my early teaching. Your 3 favorite children's literature authors. I hope you can name some. Okay, so what I want to do is look at all of this information that we've just jotted down in terms of representation in our classrooms as it shows itself through literature. So if you know Walter Dean Myers is an absolutely wonderful author who's won many awards and written so many books. Some of the most well-known books, probably his most well-known book is Monster. And he wrote this really powerful op-ed for the New York Times in which he talked about the fact that when he was younger, he was a super engaged reader, but as he got older, he got less and less engaged because he really couldn't connect with the literature that was being offered to him in school, whether it was literature that he was being told to read or it was literature that was just available on the bookshelves. He was not seeing a reflection of himself anywhere in the vast majority of things that were made available to him. And even though he says, I probably couldn't have named it then, I recognize that that's what was happening to me now as an adult. And the importance of when we're teaching our kids in our classrooms and we're creating classroom libraries and we're creating school libraries, we need to make sure that our books reflect the lives of the children who are in our classrooms, but also reflect the lives of the children who don't come to our classroom each day. The whole idea, and I'm sure everyone's already heard, the idea that books need to be windows and mirrors and sliding doors, that we need to see ourselves in literature, but we also need to have opportunities to see others. So if you have some classroom somewhere in the Midwest and they say, well, my class is all white, we don't have to worry about that. Oh, you have to worry about that maybe as much or more than anybody else, right? Because your kids need windows to see lives outside of themselves, whether that be based on race or religion or any of these other social groups that may be. So the University of Wisconsin does a study periodically where they take all the children's literature that has come out, and then they give a report on which groups are being represented in the literature being published. So here are the results that came from 2015. And again, they're using that whole metaphor of a mirror. Who gets to see themselves in the mirror quite often, and which mirrors are really large, and which ones are barely a sliver, where they can't see themselves at all. So when you look at it, in 2015, 73% of all books published for children were about or reflected white characters. A little over 12% was about animals. And if you really look at books about animals, animal books often, if not solely, represent white culture. So it's not about a white character, but it's not reflecting a diversity of a culture either. A little over 7 African Americans, 3 Asian Americans, only 2% Latinx, and less than 1% were American Indians and First Nations. And if you went through and looked at those books, you would find out that a lot of the books that were written about American Indians were written in a historical context to teach about them, not just to feature them in a book that a child might enjoy and see themselves as a character. Kind of like when we think about our books that get shared sometimes about African American characters, that it's about struggle or it's about civil rights or it's about slavery. No, just books where kids are riding their bikes with each other, right? So they updated it in 2018. Oh, there we go, 2018. And you can see we have a positive shift in children's literature. We aren't where we need to be, but we're moving in the right direction. So now we have about 50% of books are about white culture. 27 books are about animals, which is still a lot when you group those together. 77 are about or reflecting white culture. 10% African American, 7% Asian American, Pacific Islander, 5% Latinx, and still only 1% American Indians. So when I saw this data, I shared it with my kids in the class, and I said, so what do you think about this? Is this important? And a lot of them didn't think it was important. A lot of the ones who are part of the dominant culture, who see themselves reflected all the time, they didn't think it was important because they said, I don't really care. I just like to read good books. I just like to read books I enjoy. And some of the other kids who don't see themselves as often disagreed quite a bit. They said, no, I think it's disrespectful. I think it's wrong. And then when the first group said, but we don't even notice, well, that's the problem. You don't notice because you're seeing yourself so regularly. So I invited the kids in my classroom to pull down all of our classroom books and keep a tally, and we tallied it to see, what does our classroom library look like? Does it look like these numbers right here? And here you can see them side by side. And I want to tell you all, I think a lot about this. And every year, if we get $300 or whatever to spend in classrooms, I spend $250 of it on books. I'm always spend almost all my money on my books. And I'm always trying to diversify my collection. And my numbers are still horrible. My numbers are still not anywhere they need to be because books are so expensive, because it takes so long to change things like that. So today we went through a exercise where I had you write down some different books that you've used this year quite often with your kids. So now I want you to ask yourself, look at the list that you wrote on your notebook. How often did the titles that you wrote down reflect authors or characters who are not white? And if I look back at mine, my picture books were awesome. That's an area where I really, really work. I noticed that my chapter book selections are not as diverse as they need to be. And that's something that I need to work on, I understand. Author studies too. I know across the school, when we talk about who does author studies, we still hear a lot of Cynthia Riley, people like that. Jacqueline Woodson's one that gets used quite often, but there's so many other authors of color who need to be highlighted when we're featuring authors. How often did your titles or authors reflect characters who were not Christian? And here's a couple of great examples of books here. The Sandwich Swap is about two girls who go to lunch, and one has a peanut butter sandwich and one has a hummus sandwich, and they both think each other's is gross, and then what happens out of that and what they learn from it. How often did yours reflect authors or characters who were not middle class? How often did your titles reflect authors or characters who were bilingual? I think we're all aware these are all groups of students who are represented in our school district. How often did they represent characters who disrupted gendered norms or expectations? This is one that gets looked over far too often. The notion of what it means to be a boy or what it means to be a girl. How often did they reflect authors or characters who were differently abled? How often did they reflect authors or characters who were offering representations of diverse family structures? So probably the answers to these are not very often. I would expect that to be true. So thinking back on all of that, all these different categorizations, all the different ways we can represent the people in our classroom, but also help our kids in the classroom understand people outside of our classroom too, to bring them into them and give them value and have opportunities to reflect on that and talk about some of those things together. What did you notice? And what do you think? So I'm curious, maybe share in the chat, what are some things that you all talked about? Or you can come off mute. That would be lovely as well, just to hear some voices. What were some big takeaways?
We were just discussing the fact that we need to take inventory of our classroom libraries. And, you know, especially for teachers who have been teaching a while, we tend to go to the books that we know. You know, go to those familiar books. We're comfortable. We know how to integrate them as best we can. But I think the idea that you brought of pulling all those books out and kind of going through and taking an inventory to make sure that we have representation is an excellent idea. And something else that we talked about was sometimes we don't know what's out there just because we're so busy, you know, teaching standards and everything else. It would be great if we had like like a list or a website or something to kind of go with some diverse books to kind of go with some of the topics that we teach. That would be helpful.
And I have that for you. I'm going to share that with you before we break for the day. Any other thoughts?
I think, you know, some of our go-to and what we want to read and we think automatically is diverse is, you know, race. I feel like that's always like an easy topic go-to, but I know somebody brought up in our session that, you know, sometimes it's just differences in boys and girls. And, you know, why is it necessary for boys just to read about cars or whatever? And
right.
So I think that's important as well, to not just focus on, you know, just the different races, but other aspects as well.
Yeah. So I want to honor you all the time because I know that we're supposed to break in 3 minutes. Here we go. Can you still see my screen, Jessica?
No, we cannot.
It is again. Okay, let me pull it back over real quick because I want to show a resource for everyone before we go.
Now we can.
Okay. So a group of other Richland 2 teachers and I last summer started, out of all the social unrest and everything that was happening, decided that we can't just point our fingers at police departments and all these other people when we know for a fact in our own lives we have work to do in our schools, in our district, in our classrooms. So we started an organization called Equity Through Education Collaborative with the idea of what we would like to do is provide resources for teachers who want to do this work in their classroom, not just with the diverse books, but with all the justice-oriented things, with the action-oriented things, to give them resources, but also give them opportunities to work collaboratively together and with us to think up and think together about how we might make this a bigger part of our teaching practices. So the website is equitythroughed.com. Let me pull this over. And when you go to the website, there we go. You come up to resources right here. You can go to preschool through 5th grade text sets. And we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books sorted all sorts of different ways. So let's say you want to do an author study. You can go to author sets. And we have provided for you all kinds of wonderful authors that you can pull straight into your classroom for a variety of purposes. And when you click on these authors, it will show you numerous book titles and a description of those books. Okay. And at the very bottom, there's also a link to their author website, so you can find out more about them. All right. So we have author sets. We also have books sorted by, I'll come down here first, representation of peoples and cultures. So if you want to build your classroom library, but you're not really sure what are some of the really good books that are out there that I could purchase, you can come find that right here about African Americans, Afro-Latinx, Arab Americans, differently abled, Jewish, Muslim, mixed race families. We obviously don't have every social group, but we're going to keep growing this website and growing this website as we move along so that those resources are there for everyone. And then one other way that I want to show you right now, at least, that we've sorted books are based on different issues. So that if you needed books on citizenship and immigration, let's say education rights, excluding others, ethnic discrimination, gendered expectation, you can come here to any of these and click on it. Let's say limited income, income insecurity, and we put together text sets for you where you can read descriptions of different books and see which ones really meet your needs the best. And we will keep adding to these also. One of our thoughts on this was we get so many things through Facebook and other social media like, oh, 8 great books for this, 7 great books for this. What we're trying to do is capture all that and keep adding it to our website. So all of those books are in one place and you don't have to worry about everything flying by you. And then when you go to the bottom of these, I have also provided access to other sites who are doing similar work, who will have some books we don't have, and we have some books they don't have, but just so that you know that there are other resources out there also. So really, there's no excuse to not find great, diverse books, great books based on different issues to bring into our classroom, because here is a wonderful resource provided right here. Take that off and come back and say, that is it. I want to thank you all so much. I did write a book that was published last fall called Social Justice Talk, which goes much more detail about a lot more topics than just this one topic, although this is one topic that's included. But it really, I don't know, like self-promote or anything, but it is a good resource for elementary teachers because we don't get enough examples of elementary teachers doing justice-oriented work in their classrooms. It's out there, but we don't hear about it or get enough support for it, I feel. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, Chris. And teachers, if you have your cameras on, I'm not sure who Chris can see, but I'm going to give you a round of applause for following up and doing a wonderful part 2 to the fabulous conversation. Very informative and inspiring conversation that we had with Dr. Grant. And you came through today and just took the reins and did a wonderful job with carrying us into a second stretch. And Jessica and I will continue our conversation and planning for what's next. You brought the 4 domains of social justice to us. And when I looked at it, and I know you said that you'd seen the video that Dr. Grant did, but I just thought your follow-up today was perfect because you started with identity and the second one was diversity. I think that Dr. Grant really challenged us with thinking about identity and how that shows up in our classroom. And then you came and really talked to us about diversity. And I can speak for myself, stretched my thinking about classroom libraries and diversifying even my own collection. I heard one of the teachers mention that the group she was in typically talked about how we typically look at race when we're talking about diversifying our collection or thinking about books that we choose. And so I just appreciate the questions that you gave us to reflect on our practices and the resources that we have in our classrooms to help us with social justice and culturally relevant teaching in 2021. So thank you, Chris. It was such a pleasure having you this afternoon. Teachers, the sign-in sheet link has been placed in the chat several times. I'll drop it there once again if you have not been able to catch it going by on your screen. And if you will sign in, that is it for us this afternoon. We appreciate your time. Thank you for being here with us, and we hope that you have a wonderful Friday tomorrow.